questions you want. We have Steiny, so Dan Labuda, he's our electric traffic manager. So last time we talked about this, that's when Scooter was still here, so I've pretty much got him up to speed. And they have Jeff Hinkleman's here. He was gracious enough to join us. He's from WPS, LB Energies.
Oh, I'm comfortable here.
Okay. I would be too.
So I asked him to join us because I obviously don't know some of WPS tariffs, and if you have any technical questions or anything like that, he can maybe help us answer some of those. So this basically, I'll go through a little bit of the history, but last August was the last time this came up, and there was a request at the time that staff look into this a little bit further. So it'd been sitting on the outstanding items list for a while. So I think we finally had enough information that we felt comfortable proceeding with this, especially now that we're coming up on the summer of the construction season. So first of all, there's two types of streetlights in the city. There are city-owned streetlights, and then there are the utility-owned streetlights. About 73% of the streetlights in the city are owned by the utility, which is WPS here. And they have a mixture of different pole and fixture types throughout the city, which isn't unusual. I'm keenly aware as I'm driving around now, you can go through different neighborhoods in different cities and see all different kinds of poles and fixtures. The official lifespan of a pole is about 20 years. However, the functional lifespan in Wisconsin is closer to 40 years due to lower UV and the low wind related vibrations. So as you can see, the city owns about 1,750 and WPS owns the rest. The majority of WPS utility poles are wood. They do have some black fiberglass as well, and then they have some older concrete poles. I looked in, most of those were installed in the 70s to around 1980, a couple in the late 60s. So first I'll reiterate, some of you remember this, some of you might not that are newer, but our city policy is we switch to city-owned streetlights and we install aluminum or steel poles when we meet the following criteria. If we have a new road construction project, we have funding available in the budget, and generally we look at about 5 streetlight minimum for the same area because we have to put a service in to power those lights. So we use the black aluminum or steel with the acorn fix. We use the acorn fixture in a heavier pedestrian areas like downtown, Main Street, Oregon. We did on Algoma. And then we use the poles with the Cobra head fixtures in residential neighborhoods. And then there's also a park style light that at one point in time the Parks board decided that that's what they wanted in the parks. We try to standardize it as much as possible just for maintenance, inventory, consistency. Some of you have been over at our tour. You can see our yard. We got a lot of stuff. So the less different options we have, the less inventory we have to stock. We don't install wood poles. The reasons for that is because we don't have as much heavy equipment as the utility does to install those. They require a 4-foot hole. And we find it easier for our maintenance and durability to install poles on concrete bases. They're easier to maintain, and they're more durable and they're less labor intensive. So we'll talk a little bit about WPS. So let me just give you a brief history first. So WPS contacted the city, I think it was like the fall of 22. And at that time they said there were about 10 concrete poles that they deemed that were past their useful life or deficient on the northeast side of the city. And they came and said, well, what do you want to do? About that time they also had some fiberglass poles on Jackson Street that they deemed structurally deficient that needed to be replaced. We discussed these issues with council in January of 23, and I'll get back to, I went forward a couple of days. So I'll give you some information on what the options are, and this is similar to what they told us at the time. So there's distribution poles, which those are the ones where you have utilities attached to them. It's not just a standalone street light. So they'll replace that with company standard pole, typically wood, at no cost to the lighting consumer. And if it's a non-standard material, the customer pays the cost differential. So Jackson Street was a good example of that. I must have this on that timer. You can see on the top left, there's the concrete poles. That's what they were replacing at that time. There, in the middle, there's a standard wood pole with cobra head, and on the right's a fiberglass pole with a cobra head. The distribution pole you can see has utilities attached, and then they have a couple different types of fixtures. There's that cobra head, an acorn, and then what they call a paragon. So at the end of the life, they generally require a 3-year lighting contract with the following options. They can remove the pole, that would be no cost. You can have it replaced with a wood pole and rent it on a monthly fee. That's another option. They used to offer that as well for fiberglass poles, but they no longer offer that as an option. Or you can have the pole replaced with wood and pay in advance, which is about $1,500 a pole, and there's no monthly contract. Now, back when we talked about this in 2023, that's one of the things that changed. I'm going to take this off the slide. So back in 2023, they also offered a monthly fee for the fiberglass or the wood poles. Currently, they do not offer that anymore. So you have to either pay for the fiberglass pole, pay for the wood pole, or you can pay a monthly fee. However, sometimes it's free, so we all like free, so that's good. But if it's on their plan, their pole replacement plan, sometimes there will not be a cost to the customer. So I know that we've had some of these replaced and have not paid a cost for those. So that's one of the other options.
And if we have issues with the communication companies that are on our poles, and there's some issue going on and we got to replace the pole, and sometimes AT&T owns a pole and we rent them, but some of those end up being freebies for you. We just replace them. So there's just a lot of stuff out there.
If you're gonna speak, if you could come up to the table, I'm gonna, just so the microphone can pick you up.
Sure.
I don't want to make you come up here, but people at home would like to hear you a little clearer.
Oh, I see them, yeah.
Thank you.
So anyway, so those are the difference, the distribution poles like I talked about and the dedicated light poles. Mostly what we're talking about are the dedicated light poles, but they also have the distribution poles which occasionally need to be replaced. I just wanted to let you know that the different type of fixtures. So the most popular is the Cobra head, which is the one that obviously has the long arm on it. Those generally offer the best light coverage. So like I said, if in residential neighborhoods, those are probably, when we put them in the city-owned, that's usually what we would use. And that's generally what WPS uses as well. They generally offer the best light span, and you get the best bang for your buck, in my opinion. We have used those acorn styles, and generally we use those in like the heavy pedestrian areas, like I mentioned, like Main Street, Oregon, where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. The downside to those is you don't get quite as good of a light spread, and you need more of them.
And those are on shorter poles. You see
Right.
those 3 fixtures, those are on post tops, we call them. They're like
Yep.
14 feet high.
Yep. So those are, I think I put like 15 feet on those, and the city-owned ones, we use 20-foot poles, and then the WPS wood and fiberglass are on 25-foot poles.
Yep.
Here's just some questions that have arisen. Questions are, is there a predetermined replacement schedule for WPS-owned poles? The utility determines when they need replacement based on the age and/or inspection or end of life. We can request replacement if we want. I am not aware of a time when we did that recently anyway. Another question is if a replacement is necessary, will WPS replace like for like? And they said yes, they will, and then they'll bill the city accordingly based on the pole type. And then there is an option you could downgrade a fiberglass to wood if you would like to.
And we have a third-party inspector on a lot of our wood poles, comes through and inspects a lot of the older poles. They just drill into it, and they take a sample, and then they see, is that pole starting to deteriorate? That's when we decide we're gonna replace. A lot of it's distribution poles that hold the wires and everything. It's not just lighting poles. So, anyway.
Good, thanks. So we have a couple different options. Option 1 is status quo. You can use the standard WPS wood poles and then only pay the upcharge for the black fiberglass poles and established gateways and corridors. That is kind of what our current practice has been. So there wouldn't be an additional budgetary cost. You can see there, some pluses, minuses. It's the least costly. It's equitable. If it's a distribution pole, we may get wood pole anyway. So there's that. There's some standardization. The con is, some of you remember, some perceive wood as less aesthetically pleasing. So that's probably the biggest con. And that's kind of the complaint we've had over the last couple of years. There have been poles that have been replaced with wood, and we don't hear anything about it. But we have heard from a couple people that are wondering, why was this concrete pole replaced with wood, or the fiberglass pole? There are some older black fiberglass as well that might have been replaced with wood, and we just explained to them that that's the utility owns that pole and that's their standard.
In the old concrete from the 70s, they crack, and then they get moisture and they freeze, and then, the engineer probably will look at those again this year. We still have like 46 out there, so they can become structurally unsound, so then we gotta replace them with wood or fiberglass, and we give you the option.
Right. Yep, and I'll get to that question in a minute. That's one of the questions, though, is will WPS ask us what our choice is? And if they're concrete, they will, which previously we had told them to go ahead with the wood based on the council's direction at that time. So option 2 is we could tell WPS that the city would like to establish a black fiberglass upgraded pole throughout the city. We could budget that expense accordingly and increase the street lighting budget to do that. So there are, the pluses to that would be, it would be equitable. There'd be some standardization. We could budget for it. And then there's also, some negatives to that as well. Sorry, I can't see that far very well, but that's the easiest to implement for new installations and planned projects such as road improvement projects or WPS system improvement project, as they would be giving us advanced coordination and notice as well. So in that case, they would notify us ahead of time, so we could do that. The cons are, obviously, we'd have to budget for that. Some residents, and I have heard that, some prefer the wood. So maybe that's an option as well with some people. Some are going to get replaced, like the distribution poles may not be able to be replaced with fiberglass, or if they deem a safety or emergency, they might not have enough time to ask our preference. They might do wood anyway because that's their standard, correct?
Yeah, well, like on Jackson Street, you got 36 distribution black poles, and we got lights on 30 of them. And we replaced 6 or 7 back 2 years ago.
Yep.
And you paid the cost difference between fiberglass and wood. For distribution poles are more expensive, and that was $2,000 back 2 years ago.
Yep.
Well, I just checked today, and the cost difference is $3,300 because all of our prices on everything has gone way up. So anyway.
And just so I'm clear, we chose yes in that instance at that time, correct?
Yep.
Perfect.
So if one gets hit tonight, the
Yep.
crews are going to be out there. They're going to replace it with fiberglass, and then
Well,
Jim's
like,
going to
like
get
for
it
like.
done.
So we've established a policy on Jackson that like for like is okay, but not elsewhere so far. in other
Right,
words. So
right,
we have
right.
precedent for like replacement
Yep.
and a standing standard with WPS to do so.
Yeah.
Great.
And if you ever change that, you can do that. Let us know. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So the cons to this option are, like I said, some prefer the wood. And the other one I didn't mention yet is it's not a one and done cost. At some point, the pole needed to be replaced again, and then we would have to pay for that charge again. Like if somebody hits it and knocks it down and they don't have insurance and there's nobody to bill. I get that question a lot. Well, what happens if somebody hits it? Well, if they have insurance, we bill an insurance company. If they don't have insurance, we try to bill the individual. If they can't pay for it, then obviously the city ends up paying the cost.
Yeah, we get a lot of them hit up in that Schwaben and stuff. We bill the third party as best we can. I don't know if they pay it or they don't, or what happens. But,
Right.
yeah.
And usually if there's nobody to collect from, the city ends up paying for it. So there's this is another option. We could devise a policy, and this is a question we got asked, I think, last summer. One individual anyway wanted to know, well, what if I want to pay to have an upgraded pole, the one that's in front of my house, for example. We could do something like you could have a policy that would allow a neighborhood association or some like group of individuals request and fund upgraded streetlight in designated areas. The pros there are, groups could decide what's best for their area, and then the initial cost would be paid by the individual or groups, not the city. The downside to that would be, some neighborhoods may be able to afford that, some may not. There's the consensus issue. I mean, obviously people vary in their opinions if they think wood's nicer, fiberglass, or what type of fixture. If it's a group or say a neighborhood association or something, it's pretty complex to initiate based on, I did talk to the city attorney a little bit about it. There are options, but it's kind of borderline whether this would be a way that you could like assess people or something along those lines. So it's complex. And then if you pay it up front, it wouldn't be one and done again. At some point we'll have to pay WPS again. In this case, it'd be easier to crowdsource at implementation the first time, but then it's going to be more difficult, 10, 15 years down the line. It's not feasible to implement for unplanned pole replacements, as we mentioned earlier, the emergencies or knockdowns, or if WPS needs to do something and safety is a factor, they might not be able to, or they might not have that in stock. They might have to just do what they have to do to get it done. So, previous council direction, this was back in January 2023, was status quo, the WPS standard of wood poles, or what WPS deemed necessary. And then the city would pay the upcharge and upgraded black fiberglass poles in gateways like Jackson Street. And that's kind of how we've been budgeting it to this date. The staff recommendation is the same. That would continue with our current process. And then we obviously have installed the city-owned streetlights where we could. Now back in, gosh, this is before my time, but I know this council's trying to keep taxes down. So probably 15 years ago, maybe a little more, there was an initiative to reduce the number of streetlights in the city, and that was a budgetary strategy back then, so we did do that. I still get a few calls a year from people that want their streetlight back, even though it's been 15 years or whatever since then. So there is some people, there's some conscientious people out there yet that are still aware that we had done that to reduce the street lighting budget. The street lighting budget, we budget currently a little over $1 million a year. It's mostly electricity, but then there's obviously the cost of the poles that we rent as well as the ones that we purchase from WPS as well. So I just have a couple other questions that have come up that as we went along here. Have other cities requested all black fiberglass, or does everyone follow WPS policies? So these are some questions at WPS. They said for distribution poles, it's not common to have a citywide requirement for WPS or WE Energies. Fiberglass poles are typically project specific based on location and visibility, like Jackson Street, for example, instead of being an established city requirement. And then we mentioned this earlier, if a replacement is necessary, would WPS contact us to confirm what the city would prefer? And they said, no, it's not feasible to contact us every time. But the concrete poles are the exception. So there are still some concrete poles that they would contact us about. And then, like we mentioned earlier, like the Jackson Street option as well.
Jim, while you're there, are there any other thoroughfares or areas like Jackson that you have a standing policy with WPS for what type of replacement?
Not currently, no.
So that's the only one?
Yep.
So everywhere else is just ad hoc, whatever they decide to do?
Yep.
But are there other even considerations of those being blocks of things that can be considered in that manner, or is just the Jackson Street just the one we came up with?
That's just the one where WPS had deemed that they had so many deficient streetlights there.
Okay, so
at the
did council
time.
choose at that time to make that budgetary decision and say we want that standing policy from here into the future forever, that if one gets hit on Jackson, it was replaced like for like? Because I don't recall that vote either.
There wasn't a vote on it, it was just general direction to
Okay.
staff. So it was more the nodding heads things, they're like, yep, do that.
You know that's my next statement, because January 23, there was no direction given, there were no
No.
nodding heads, it was a presentation,
Yep.
and then we went down this path. So I'm just
Yep.
trying to figure out, if we have a policy for Jackson, I think that's
Yep.
fantastic. And that was, I brought this up in the first place, like for like is what I'm after here, because it's a bummer to have a thing replaced that's in your front yard and have it be different. That's my only concern. But the fact that we have a policy for Jackson is new information for me, because I've never heard it before.
Yep.
So we've established that precedent at some point, so we can do it again if we want to.
Yeah, so
We don't know
basically.
how we did it in the first place.
Well, it's basically, that's what, with staff and council, we decided that we would pay for that upgrade and upcharge on corridors and gateways. So that would be like Jackson, South Park, 9th, any of those corridors coming into the city where we would have black fiberglass that council at that time was comfortable with. Yeah, we'll pay for that. So that, I think, we've established, and I think that's been generally agreed to, but I think the question is more so that residential neighborhoods, because nothing's really been established there. And it hasn't really arisen in the last 15 years until the concrete poles came up. And, I mean, I think, I showed a slide earlier, but you can see, I mean, this is a picture of the concrete poles we're talking about. I mean, to me, you can tell they look like they're from 1970, and that's what they are, from 1970. But yeah, so that's where council, some were good with the wood poles, and then the question came up again last year because there was that neighborhood, a couple poles were being replaced with wood, and that's where a couple people were asking about it. So that's the brief presentation I have. So I'll open it for discussion, and like I said, I'm here in Stymie, and Jeff, try to answer any questions.
Yeah, Jim, I got a quick question about new development, namely in the city's policies of those. I drive by Gibson Court a fair amount, just on my way to work most days, and I see either my eyes are lying to me or I see black fiberglass
Yep.
in that neighborhood. So is it the city's policy where we try to install black fiberglass on new development, or is it just whatever goes? There is no policy, it's whatever.
Yeah,
goes.
those are city-owned streetlights on Gibson Court, I believe, right, Sammy? Yeah. That was our first test on solar lighting, but yes, we always, if we're installing city-owned streetlights, we always install, we don't install wood. They're always black fiberglass because, what I mentioned earlier, we don't have the equipment, number one, to install the wood poles. It requires a lot of heavier equipment to get deeper bases. And we generally use the aluminum or the steel. So that would be if a street's reconstructed, that's our policy. We'll install the black fiberglass as long as it makes sense to install our own service. So we have to have it, we can't just do a one-off light here and there, because then we have to incur the expense of putting the utilities in and putting a service in there, and obviously we're not going to bore the road for one light or something like that. But if we have like a street that's being reconstructed, like we did Cherry Street this last year, Wisconsin Street, Algoma, then we'll put in city-owned street lights. If there's a nice big stretch, we can put our service in, and those are always black, and they would be the aluminum or steel. I mean, it looks basically the same as fiberglass, but anyway, ours different. The difference is ours are on a concrete base, where WPSs aren't always. But the one other thing I want to mention, though, to answer the other part of the question is, so if it's a developer like Chad or somebody's developing a whole residential neighborhood, then it's in the development agreement. So the developer will pay for the lights up front, and they will pay to get them installed, and then the city takes over maintenance after they're installed. So in that case, it depends what the developer wants in their development.
Jim, you mentioned a Parks style post earlier.
Mhm.
Those are, I was in Menominee this morning, those are concrete. I presume those are city owned?
Those are, the concrete ones are really old, right?
Yeah.
Right, but that's park style, that's what we have in our parks,
Yeah.
the concrete pole, similar to what we have in White Swan.
If you go along Hazel Street, and we did that 6 years ago, maybe. Right along Hazel Street,
Yep, there was some there too.
that black Well, the ones right along Hazel Street are the black. Lumek is the name of that style of fixture. It's on, and they're on a 15?
It's the acorn head ones, the decorative ones. we use.
The acorns are what we have, like,
New Wagyu got those and that kind of stuff, yeah. I don't even know exactly.
Rosalia,
Yep.
CP, those are the park style light. There's a section of Hazel between Washington and Merritt that are the acorn style, because we did those because of more of a historic
Yep.
look.
And this is what I'm getting at.
North of Merritt is the new park style
Well,
that we have, like in South Park.
Yep.
And
Either way, Menominee has concrete posts.
it does have some.
Yep.
Some are
So-
getting replaced this year.
Right, are those city or WPS?
Will it be city?
So do we have a policy to replace those like for like? Because we're not gonna put wood poles up in Menominee or on Hazel or Washington or Merritt, right?
No, those are going
So
to be the.
why do we let WPS do that on White Swan Drive? It doesn't make any sense. It's the same question to me. That's why, I mean, I know it's not everybody's favorite topic, but that seems like not great policy because we're replacing what you deem to be a good thing on Merritt and Hazel and Washington. And if the city has control, we do it, I think, a great way. But if it's somebody else's, we don't even bother to ask them.
If the underground infrastructure is there, then it would be and that infrastructure up in that neighborhood that you're referring to is owned by WPS.
Correct, I understand that. But we're allowed to set that policy is my point, because we did so with Jackson.
Right, yeah.
So again, I mean, I'm not gonna belabor this point. I know it's not everybody's favorite topic and we don't need to spend forever on it. But since you're asking for options, option 2 here sounds great to me.
So, I live in a neighborhood where one street was, Coolidge was replaced last year, and there's now city-owned lighting, I'm assuming, on there, because that's the fixtures you're talking about. Adams, one block over, was not replaced, and it, I believe, has wood poles. And I've noticed the difference, and I'm on city council, and I just assumed, well, it's because that street's not replaced yet, but eventually all of our lighting will match. I know from sitting here in these conversations that that's not true. It's just that street was replaced, the other one wasn't. Who knows if the others will ever change? I think that people probably are confused because I had an assumption, and I'm probably more aware of city policies than the average person on Adams. Maybe not. I guess maybe my question is, I know you have normal scripting that you give when someone calls about these things. I imagine they don't call super often. I know Chris really cares about it. But when we look at the cost of these things, is there any, I'm assuming it's cheaper for us to buy them than pay for WPS's poles, right? We don't pay $1,500 in advance per pole, do we?
Well, it comes down, the issue is, yes, it's what I talked about earlier. If we were replaced, we have to have a service to also.
Understood that.
Yeah.
What if we bought the pole, though? If we're going to buy the pole from WPS or from somebody else, what if we just buy the pole we like and then hand it to them to install?
I don't know if that's an option.
No, they won't do that. Yeah, I mean.
Have we asked them to do that?
No, I know they won't do that. They won't take something you buy. I mean, we have our own stock, we order it, we buy it, we put it in. I just know that they won't do that.
Because they're not, are they actually, is WPS actually installing these things, or are they hiring a
Oh,
contractor?
no, we install.
Will you install the poles?
No, Jeff came in late. Jeff works for WPS.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, we have, the downrigger or whatever, I mean, we bore the hole and put them in. Yeah, our guys do all that work. But it's $1,500 for a new wood pole, about. I mean, a few years ago, it was $500 or $600.
Yeah, and there's just no markup there by WPS? That's my question. Like, how can we make sure that we're working together?
As far as materials and how they mark it up, I
Yeah.
can't answer that for you. You pay for the labor, and the labor, everything. Our prices on transformers and everything have just skyrocketed since COVID, so.
To that point though, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but when reconstruction occurs, if it occurs where WPS owns the infrastructure and the lampposts, we are actively trying to take it back, correct? Every chance we get.
Yes, if it makes sense
That's what we're
to,
asking.
yeah, if it makes sense to, like I said, if there's like 5 lights or so, then we can install in service, and it makes sense, then we'll install city-owned
And then it's
streetlights.
cheaper going forward.
I mean, you could buy your own wood poles and get, MJ Electric or Peeper or somebody, these contractors can install it for you.
But that's gonna cost more.
I know.
So if I understand this correctly, WPS will not just do à la carte service for installing bulk city purchases.
No.
Boil it down. Okay, and then I guess, Jim, we buy the lights, so it sounded like it was whenever we can, but now it sounds like it's not whenever we can, it's when it makes sense. Do we have an outline policy on that? I mean, how is, like, as a percentage of light poles in the city, how is the city share versus the WPS share increased over the past 5 to 6 years?
So I don't have that specific number, but we generally, I would say that it's based on the road reconstruction. So when we redid Algoma, that's a good stretch of lights. I don't know, Stein, you know how many that was off the top of your head? It's probably,
Algoma?
That's a lot.
I would say that was in the neighborhood of 60 lights.
yeah, so that, we took a big chunk over at once, but still, you can see there's, WPS still owns about, 5,000 lights in the city, and the city's, 1,750,
You
so.
paid us $931,000 last year and $954,000 in '23.
Yeah,
The rate went up 0.7% this year, it's going up 3% next year.
right.
But, yeah, when I worked with Scooter, it was always like, well, we gotta keep it below a million with WPS. That's fine, whatever you wanna do, but, yeah, I see you keep reducing it with all these road projects.
Right.
And our rates are gonna keep, the lighting rate doesn't go up like the electric rates do, it's just,
Yep.
so, it is what it is. but-
Have we had conversations, or is it technically possible, because I'm way outside my wheelhouse, can we just buy the infrastructure? The WPS?
I'll let either Jeff or Stein explain that.
What's that?
Why can't we buy the WPS infrastructure? Why do we have to replace the road and install our own?
Oh, you're saying, well, we own the wire and everything going to it.
Yeah. what if we bought
Typically.
that?
I mean, I've seen us sell infrastructure and then we just put a metering point in. I mean, is that something you want to look at?
I mean, if you're charging us $1 million and we could do it for 700, yeah.
Well, I mean, then you got to maintain it. So, you're paying us to maintain everything too.
Yeah, that's the
Carpool
other
accident,
thing.
we might get a call, one of your poles is down and our guys are going to respond because they call our 800 number.
Right.
And we're just going to get it out of the way and then let you guys know you got a pole to replace. But it's ours, could be safety, a wire, energized, and
Yeah,
anyway.
it would be a lot of labor, which currently we have 4 electricians, so WPS obviously has a whole cruise of
I
electricians.
guess let me ask this question. Have we done the math to say if we hired additional electricians and we bought the infrastructure to determine if there would be a cost savings for the city of Oshkosh?
No. I don't even know that, is that an option? You said to buy all the infrastructure? I'd imagine that'd be pretty
I
expensive.
mean, I can pose the question, I can
Yeah.
find out for you quickly. I honestly have never seen it done, but, I mean, we sell transformers to customers in the past, and they take over the whole primary and secondary system, 5 transformers, and then, we primary meter them at one point, and then they own it, and then 25 years later, they come back and say, ooh, we don't have a contractor to take care of this stuff, and now we've had a lot of big guys come back on our system, well, they gotta pay for us to put new infrastructure in.
So
But-
just to dumb down, I think what you said to me, that means that if we take a street like Adams that did not have the lighting replaced, it's still owned by WPS, I'm assuming, but let's assume it is. You would put a transformer at the end of that street, we'd buy everything towards the lights, and it would just be metered towards us. We could own the infrastructure, we could own it all.
You can own it all, and we just have a meter, and you're just using energy from it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that might be cheaper if we wanted to replace the poles eventually on that street. We don't know.
As long as there's no distribution on the wood poles.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
only for poles that have just lights only,
But
Sure. But then,
which is only a small fraction.
Yeah. Because
The rest have,
distribution,
Other things.
we've got comms on all of our
They
stuff,
pay-
paying a lease fee and all that,
so
so.
they
it's
pay to
not-
use them, but could we license them?
Sure, if we own them.
I'm just having a hard time thinking that it's cheaper to pay WPS to do all of this work than for us to own it ourselves. And maybe it is, I don't know.
Yeah, James is gonna jump in here. We'll let the engineer jump in here, 'cause
And I think it's a bit of what the mayor just said is, we couldn't just take over all the infrastructure because all the houses are fed off of that, and then we would have to become an electric utility, which opens up a whole different can of worms. So it would have to be lights only type of infrastructure without us having to become a regulated electric utility.
Okay. But we could do that.
Well, to be a regular.
Well, no, not become a regular utility. I don't want to be that.
I don't either.
I don't want to do that.
No, you don't want to do that.
But to buy just the lights. It sounds like if you meter it, then you could buy just the lights.
We'd have to look at some scenarios to see if there are instances where those types of situations exist, because in a lot of situations, the lights are on a pole where distribution is also, the distribution wires are there, and then a light is on the pole as well. So I think it'd be a very small number where it is lights only. Are there a few? Yes, there are.
Yeah.
But I think it would be a smaller number. And like Jim said, a lot of times with our street program, we kind of look at that 5 lights, because that is enough to overcome the cost of installing the service and the transformer and all of those things. Less than that, it's more costly to put that infrastructure in and have to maintain it.
For year 1, right? Or do we look out 10 years for those types of programs?
I think that was not just a 1 year, I think that was more of a life cycle analysis that was done by Scooter at that time.
Yeah. We've looked at it in the past, and that's where we're past the break-even point to put our own service on. It was generally like 5 street lights.
And sorry, just one more question. When we do add our own service to those streets, and there still are utility poles necessarily, because those people are getting power still, those are just 25-foot poles, and we put in 15-foot poles, and so there's just both?
Yes.
In a residential, like 15th that's getting done now, that's going to be, our poles are 20-footers, so we stay underneath Spectrum, AT&T, everybody else that's on the wood pole. You guys are what, like normally like 30 feet?
Yeah, those are 30, 35-foot poles.
So they're up on top, obviously.
And so I guess maybe my thought is that in every instance where we have city poles, we still also have wood poles on those streets.
No.
Maybe not everyone, but many downtown,
Yeah.
because, the.
Well, unless the utilities are undergrounded.
Right.
Right? As long as the utilities are above ground,
Yes.
all those streets might have 2 different kinds of
Go
poles.
visit
Yes.
9th Street west of Oakwood, and that's exactly, you'll see
Correct.
our new black poles, and then 4 feet from it will be a very tall wood pole. And
Yep.
do that in every terrace.
Wagoo is all brand new, low acorn top poles and tall, as I was showing you. That's brand new road that we just did, tall wooden poles next to 6 inches from beautiful decorative poles. So it's a good circle back, and I'll leave it alone. But White Swan, where we're replacing the concrete, is underground. They're all and only decorative lamp posts. The other power we're talking about is not shared in wood ones, except for minimal instances on the thoroughfares there. So you're replacing a whole neighborhood of only lamp posts that are only decorative, and we're putting 14-foot nice looking poles with 25-foot wooden poles.
And I think that makes sense. My only point, I'll stop talking about it too, is that in my neighborhood we have both kinds of poles, and I don't care. Someone probably cares, and they have not emailed me yet, but they probably will after I'm saying that. My question is there the potential for cost savings if we acquire these light-only poles? Especially if we think it's a good idea when we redo streets a lot of the time. The economics have to say when we redo the streets that it's going to be saving us costs, otherwise we wouldn't have done it. And so my question is, if we could buy the infrastructure and something that's possible with the transformer, what would the cost savings be, or cost increase? I think we should do the math. That's my thought.
Jim, I don't think you said it at the beginning of this, but can you tell us why we met today? Because, I'm reading through this, and I've listened, and I've been through it a little bit in the past. I don't see what's different today than what was in the past. And then I've got a comment after that.
Yep. So council asked last summer, I think it was at the August meeting, that staff research this issue some more and present back to council. So I know when City Manager Roloff left, it was on his list of things that we're supposed to follow up on. So this is the follow-up to that direction in August of '24.
Okay, good. That's a perfectly fine answer. I wish Mark would have just taken it with him.
I didn't, for the record, I didn't ask for it to come back. I thought it was just going to die there also. So it is what it is.
And I get it. I do. But I also don't care. I just don't. And the real reason I don't is because we have tried very hard to stay under $1 million budget for utility lighting for lighting for a very long time. And quite honestly, if I have any interest in increasing that budget for any reason, it would actually be to put more poles with more lights in neighborhoods that need it, specifically neighborhoods that have higher property crime rates, neighborhoods that have higher physical crime rates, attacks against people. I'm thinking the university overlay area would be a great area to actually have more lighting. So if I'm going to spend any more money personally, the biggest bang for that buck on the city budget side would actually be to put more lights and not different types of light poles, because that doesn't do anything for public safety. That's where I stand on that one. I've lived in neighborhoods that have above ground everything, below ground power with just poles. I've got one in my front yard with a wood pole with just a light only. The power's underground. I don't care, but that's me. I don't. I do understand other people think differently than me. There's a few. But budget's tight, and I can't see spending an additional dime on more decorative ones when we could be putting more lights up to increase safety. Just my own thoughts.
2 questions. One, what you said, I just forgot it. The pole life, like what is the life of a pole? Many years?
They say the functional life's 20 years, but in Wisconsin, they're getting more like 40. I mean, some of these concrete
about the
ones, the poles.
The poles.
Oh, these concrete ones were put in, what, 1970s?
Yeah, those lasted a long time, but now in the last 10 years, they've started cracking, and then they split with the ice, and,
So they're lasting 40 years, you said.
Okay, some of them have, yeah.
And a wood pole can last, 30, 40, 50 years.
Okay. And then my other comment was about, or question I guess was, looking at the different fixture types and thinking about the introduction of the shorter city-owned poles for just lights, to the safety point, is there a different fixture type that helps spread the light down and out? So instead of adding more lights, is there a better fixture that's going to get the same amount or greater lumens down for light down where you want it, versus like that acorn fixture is going to release light up into the air where we don't use it?
I'll let Jeff answer.
There probably are. We just offer those 3 on those post ops, the 3 that you showed us.
Well, I think the Cobra head obviously gives you better light spread than the other 3, correct?
Yeah, and that's more for like a
Yeah,
over the
definitely.
street light. I guess I was thinking more for some of the other areas where it's just like a sidewalk type light or something like that. I don't know if there's a fixture type that would keep the light down and improve safety and that kind of thing.
I'm sure there are. I'd have to talk to Stacy about all the options. This is what WEC Energy Group is putting in.
Yeah, this is what they currently offer, those 4, but I don't know I know there's a lot of different options, but.
Jim, I have 2 quick follow-ups. The first is, one of the residents that at least I heard from was upset about the concrete poles being removed. I know there were a couple of references to that earlier. Is there a plan or a policy to just replace them with standard wood poles, fiberglass poles? I understand a lot of the utilities around there are underground, so this is purely for aesthetics. And some people care a lot, some people don't at all. But I would just like to know what the policy is on that one. And then number 2, I live 2 blocks south of 15th, and when that project is complete, everything in my neighborhood is all just wood poles. It's been that way for a while. However, with that, are we going to start seeing more of the fiberglass that goes into that? Is that going to maintain on that policy, or are we just going to stick with wood? Because one question that I'm looking at is from a continuity perspective. If that, are we just going to pick a street that we happen to reconstruct in 1 year that's on the CIP, and that automatically is going to get fiberglass poles, or is it, the neighborhood has majority wood, we're going to stick with wood? And, forgive me if you've gone over this already, but I would just like some clarification on that point specifically.
Yeah, so the current policy is if it's WPS owned,
Yep.
we go with their policy, which is they're going to replace it with wood. And that's currently what the direction was previously, because there's no additional charge, there's less of a charge and potentially no charge. And we are only going to, and the city uses mostly aluminum But anyway, it's the same aesthetic. So if I go back to our policy, so if it's a new project and there's about 5 poles or more, then we would put in the black aluminum. If it's where we're not putting in, where we're not reconstructing enough road where it makes enough sense to switch to city-owned, then WPS is, we're gonna go with their policy, which is wood. So that's where we're currently at.
So Jacob, in that area, it's, 14th and 16th, as well as Ohio Street are coming up in the CIP. All of those would, be similar. We would be putting in, the streetlights would be on city infrastructure, and then the poles, the distribution poles for power, telephone, comms, everybody else would be, on likely WPS poles.
Okay. Yeah, because for me, it's a balance between public safety, getting more light into neighborhoods, maintaining aesthetics, making sure that, we have consistency throughout, and, the cost consideration matters to me. If there is an opportunity for us to save money in the long run while kind of threading that needle between becoming a regulated utility versus not, I'd like to explore that. But if we're just going to spend more and more money in the future on owning and maintaining more of our own poles, and in addition, facing extra regulatory scrutiny from the state, I don't know if that's something I would like to see, but I'd like it at least explored. I think it's worthwhile.
Well, in general, I agree with what Mr. Mayor said, that I would not vote for more money allocated to the aesthetics of poles. I'm going to ask a question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer. Is there an option on the wood poles to wrap them, paint them, or varnish them so they look more like the fiberglass poles or anything else? I would imagine that's just going to make it rot faster if you wrap it, but
Not that I know of.
that's fair.
I mean, I've heard people that say, why don't you paint them, but, we're not gonna let you guys paint them, it's our, we got
Right.
wires on them, and our guys aren't gonna paint them.
Well, an 8 foot and down, they're just covered in staples typically anyway from, yard signs being put up. It's just,
There's stuff on our poles that we don't like, but it happens.
But it is cheaper for, one city pole is cheaper for us to maintain than to pay for WPS's pole, is that right? Otherwise, why would we do it?
Just one for one, I don't think so. That's why we look at 5.
5 is the break-even point.
I mean, yeah, that's where I struggle a little bit with us wanting to get into the business of being an electric utility, because
Well,
there's.
it's electric utility if we do the tall infrastructure, I'm talking about
Sure.
just the poles.
But even like for maintaining them and the expertise of like the economy of having electricians on staff that know, hey, if it's in Appleton, they can, go there and fix them, or here in Oshkosh, like to have somebody on staff that we're employing and we don't have any blow down for that week, what do they do? So I struggle a little bit that we receive the benefit for that cost.
It's the right question, though, because we've
It's a great
established
question.
that 5 is the break-even point to be beneficial if we replace them and own them, and we're talking about replacing 42 concrete ones. Now, we're not talking about replacing all the underground infrastructure with them, but if perchance if they were all on the line and the road happened to be getting redone, it would be cheaper to be our nice-looking low ones replacing these instead of the option that we're going to get, which is tall wooden ones. It's going to make some people unhappy.
I also imagine our electricians never get to the end of their to-do list already. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's
Dan?
going to be anybody in a week with no wind. I don't think they're going to have nothing to do.
And if there's a way for us to assess, the light poles in the city that are clustered in 5s or more, what those cost savings would potentially look like, that's something I think would be helpful for council to take a look at. But, just a thought exercise if we can actually see.
And my point is, and this isn't just about light poles, because again, I don't care what they look like at all. At all. But I do think that if our policy is 5, why is it 5? What's the math behind 5? And I'm assuming someone has done that at some point, otherwise 5 wouldn't be the number that we're talking about. So how can we look at light poles, but how can we also look at everything else we do in that way? And this is that manage the middle of the page analogy that I've taken from Great Wolf Lodge, where if you reduce expenses, then you find money to spend other places without increasing taxes. So if 5's the number, what's the math for the 5? And how many clusters of 5 WPS poles can we go out there and find and convert to Oshkosh poles by just buying the infrastructure and putting on a meter at the end of a transformer?
Yeah, I think the math for that was done, by Stymie's predecessor, or maybe even before that, I'm not sure.
I
could be when they asked that.
No, I asked that question, it was probably 5 years ago-ish, maybe 6.
Yeah, I would
That's when
imagine Scooter had looked
Scooter
at
went
it
through,
periodically.
I'm curious to see how much money we could save.
Or spend, like, it might be more, I just think that someone should do the math.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between what we initially talked about in that discussion is it's the one-time cost of, replacing a pole versus the ongoing, you're committing to annual ongoing operating cost increases because you're gonna have to have more electricians, you're gonna have to maintain that underground infrastructure, the lines, we're gonna need more equipment. So yes, we can take a look at it, but I think that's when you talk budgeting, that's kind of how I sometimes think about it. It's like, well, you got one-time cost, that's easier to budget than an ongoing operating cost annually for however the life of it, whatever that is. So I think it is, I think what we're doing now makes a lot of sense with, obviously when we reconstruct the road, it makes sense to put our service in, but if we're gonna go through ad hoc and start doing cluster, I think that's gonna get pretty messy.
How many roads do we have to replace before we hire a new electrician?
I don't know that that's been looked at.
And so, like, that's I
I
think
understand.
someone should do the math to see if we're gonna continue the policy of replacing all of the streetlights when we do a road, when do we have to have an electrician if we're concerned about ongoing operating costs? I think the same thing should be looked at for the clusters. I think we should look at both, and maybe we stop replacing streetlights on road constructions too. Because maybe that doesn't make sense long-term if the operating costs are gonna go up exponentially.
When we replace it, it's the biggest cost savings we get now is on the monthly fees, right, for the service. It goes down quite a bit, but yes, we do have to maintain them. So that is a discussion we've had over the years when we get to operating budgets. Like, remember, we only got 4 electricians, so the more we put on them, obviously at some point you're gonna need more.
When was the last
labor
time
as well.
TO for electricians was expanded? Like, when was the last time we actually decided to grow the electrician staff by a number of FTEs?
I don't know if they ever had. But when was the last time we added an additional electrician? We've been at 4 since I've been here, which has been about a dozen years. And you've been here 30 years.
How long is that?
Almost 28.
Okay.
So 28 years or more, I guess, the answer.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up is if we're going to continue with that policy, as has been mentioned before, it would imply that we would need to hire an additional electrician at some point, which could negate the cost savings. But that's what I was curious about, is that if we're going to continue the policy of purchasing light poles where we can, how much more in operational funds are we actually spending, and then for personnel as well.
Well, we're running up on 6 o'clock here.
Can I just say one?
I was gonna say good discussion. City manager, go right ahead, and then
I was just gonna say that, we also need to look at the other things that the electricians are doing. I think there's some opportunities for possibly modernizing or making things easier. You showed me how you do the traffic lights and things like that. So that would be another thing we could do aside from just hiring more people, because you're making me have a panic attack. Sorry.
No, but good. No, it's a good point, to DJ's point, right? Continuing to try to, continuous improvement, right?
Yep.
Trying to improve our process, find savings. It's not always monetary. It all is the almighty dollar, but sometimes it's staff time too, efficiency. So it sounds like staff has a little bit more work to do. I assume we'll have a follow-up at some point in the future that I'll ask again why we're here. But otherwise, we'll break now, and then the 6 o'clock council meeting will start in a few minutes.
Well, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.